Hi, everyone. You all know me, but my name is Sarah Truby, one of the co-hosts of this series. I, of course, have another co-host of the series who is Gretchen Baker, who is also our next speaker. I know you're already all excited to hear from Gretchen. So she'll be presenting on rescue pre-plans, how to avoid or minimize the pain when something goes wrong. Gretchen started caving at Jewel Cave during a summer job in college. She later worked at several other national parks, including Carlsbad Caverns. She is now is the ecologist and cave specialist at Great Basin National Park in Nevada. She has been a National Cave Rescue Commission instructor for 16 years and also served on the Education Committee and as the Western Regional Coordinator. She is currently the National Coordinator for the National Cave Rescue Commission. She doesn't like pain much, but she does love a good adventure, so she tries to be prepared. Please welcome Gretchen.
Thank you, Sarah. I am excited to be speaking tonight, and I want to show off some of the ways that we can go have fun but not be in pain, hopefully. All right, so we're going to talk about rescue pre-plans, how to avoid or minimize the pain when something goes wrong. And so, what if? What if something does go wrong? We heard last time from Marty Reams about her accident at Spanish Cave, where just being in a crack made her knee go wrong. And we heard from Bill France about falling in Fitton Cave and how that resulted in a rescue. If you look at this photo on the right-hand side, what could go wrong there? Hopefully nothing, but that was during a bit of a survey we were doing, and we wanted to get to that high passage in order to be able to see what was in there and get that surveyed, but there was not an easy way to get up there. So that made it for interesting. So if you are having trouble coming up with what if incidents in where you go caving, a great place to go is the American Caving Accidents, or ACA. You can find out the greatest likelihood of what's going to go wrong. And Bonnie Armstrong's presentation on learning from the past, preparing for the future is fantastic for that. One of the things I really get out of reading ACA is like every couple of years, somebody rappels off the end of their rope and dies. Like, how hard is it to tie a knot at the end of your rope? So just reading that report has really made me go, okay, I need to do something there. So types of rescue pre-planning, we're going to go into 4 different types tonight. We're going to go into personal, team, cave, and regional pre-planning. And speaking of regions, if you want to learn about how caves and cave rescue differ a little bit among the different regions in the country, then I encourage you to go look at the very first episode of this Virtual Topics and Cave Rescue series. Okay, personal pre-planning. Are you ready for a cave trip? There's 3 different ways to be ready. Physically ready. Have you been sitting at home for a year because of COVID, or are you ready to go and be physical in a cave? Are you mentally ready? Do you know where you're going in the cave? Have you gotten everything together that you need? Do you have a good idea of how the trip is going to go? And then are you emotionally ready? And I bring up emotion because I was on a trip in Belize and we had a big day planned ahead of us. We had a small group that was going to go into this one section of the cave. We were really excited about it. And just before we were leaving, one of our members got a phone call and her father had just had a heart attack. She was hearing that he seemed like he was pretty good. He seemed to be stable, but she didn't know for sure. And she really wanted to go into the cave, but she also realized that it would be very distracting for her to be thinking about her father so much while she was trying to do the cave trip. So she made the wise decision to stay out so she'd be able to be in contact and find out how he was progressing throughout the day. And so it's something that we need to keep in mind. If we have something going on in our lives that might make us more emotional, maybe we really aren't ready for a cave trip on that particular day. Maybe we need to think about going on a different day. And for more on mental decisions underground, I recommend Renee Ohm's Making Decisions Underground video. Okay, so if you're physically, mentally, and emotionally ready, do you have the right gear? Does it fit? For some people, they haven't been exercising quite as much in this last year, and maybe it doesn't fit quite as well. Do you have the right number of layers for whatever the cave conditions are? A headlamp, batteries charged? I keep putting that, so I think that's something I keep forgetting to do myself. And do you have the right emergency items in your pack? Sometimes a checklist might be helpful. I put a very basic one on the right-hand side of the slide. So I find that I use checklists more and more often. But your checklist might have to really expand if you are going to a different type of cave, like the glacier and fumarole caves that Eddie talked about, because those you would have to take crampons and an ice axe. And so that you'd have to have different gear. You might also have extra gear in your trunk of your car, because it might be a horizontal cave for a recreational trip, but if somebody gets hurt, you would need vertical gear. And so you might be thinking ahead, oh yeah, I'll bring some extra things just in case. Also for pre-planning, do you have the skills necessary for the trip? Are you able to do the vertical parts? Have you done a changeover lately? If it has rebelays, are you ready for that? If it's extended crawling, are your knees ready? And for climbing and stemming, do you have that balance all good? What about bad air? Tune in for the next session, because there's going to be a great talk called Got Gas, Cognitive and Physical Effects of Bad Air in Caves by Sarah Truby, Will Orndorff, and Zena Orndorff. So a little teaser for that one coming up. Also for personal pre-planning, one of the most important things, do you have a surface contact? And do they know what to do if you don't come back when you say you are going to? Fortunately, we have a great resource for you. The Eastern region, in particular, Meredith and Brew Randall and Alex Sproul have helped develop this Caver Alert information sheet, which is now available on the NCRC website and on the main page of the NSS website. If you just go on the right-hand side, you can see where it says Caver Alert information sheet, download it to your phone. And that's so cool because you can just download it to your phone and it's a fillable PDF. You can fill it out and then send it to your surface contact. And if you're not back out by the time you say you are going to be, there are instructions on the back of what to do. And so you can call 911 and you can give them better information than the surface contact often does, where, oh yeah, somebody went caving, but I don't know how many were in the group or what vehicles they had. So this is a great resource to try to have a quicker response and a more focused response, because the information is there right at the beginning. And also for personal pre-planning, don't forget to check the weather forecast, especially if you're going into a cave that might flood. Okay, so personally, we're ready. Let's move on to our team. Who's going on this trip and what are their skills? This is particularly important if you are the trip leader, because you're ultimately responsible for everybody on that trip. And sometimes you go with the same people all the time and you know very well how you cave together. You know what their skills are, you know their strengths and weaknesses, but you may have new people come on a cave trip, or maybe you lead cave trips for your grotto for new members. And you always have different people on your trip. And so it really helps to kind of do a little safety briefing at the beginning. And a few weeks ago, I was in Utah on a trip and we did that. And that worked out really well, where we just went around the circle and everybody said their name and what kind of experience they had. And I hadn't been caving with several of them. And so it was just good to get to know them a little bit better right from the outset. And then what kind of medical skills they had. And that also was very helpful. So if we did have a problem, we know who to turn to. Specialty skills can be good to know depending on what kind of cave trip you're going on. I like to hang out with the person who's bringing the extra food, the extra yummy food that they might be willing to share. And then what kind of pace can everybody go at? That's an important thing throughout your trip too. Something else you might want to check with your team is, what equipment does everyone have? You might have a group where everybody has huge packs because they want to bring everything that they can think of in case something goes wrong. Or you might have a whole group that everyone's a minimalist. It might be good just to talk and try to come up with a few things that you can share among you so that you could put together a rescue system if you needed to. Then there's I have lots of questions in this this presentation, but I want to just kind of get you thinking, like, what happens if the trip leader has a problem, especially if it's the trip leader for one of those Grotto new member trips, and all the people on it except the trip leader are new members. Who will then be in charge? What's the protocol if someone has to leave early, or if someone gets too tired or mildly injured? Or if the group is caving at different speeds and one group gets way ahead and the other one's way behind? What do you do? Andy Armstrong addresses some of this in his presentation, Chain of Communications, Strategies for Efficient or Effective Teamwork in Cave Rescue. He also mentioned Halti, and I'm going to mention it again because I love this acronym. Halti is a way to look out for each other. So do you remember what Halti stands for? If you listened to that earlier presentation, if you want to put it in the chat, you are welcome to do that. And I'm just curious if anybody does remember what Halti means. And there's a little clue here because we do have this slide on hypothermia. That was from Brian Ickey's magical presentation where he wowed us with the ins and outs of how to do this presentation. Yeah, with lots, I felt like there was lots of magic in there. So Halti is hungry, angry, lonely, tired, and hypothermic. And since I have become associated with this term Halti a few years ago, I realized that when I go on caving trips and I'm starting to feel like, oh, I go to Halti and I go, which of those is my problem? And often I can go, oh yeah, it's been a while since I ate, so I'm hungry, or oh, I'm really tired, I need to take a break. Or I can look for my team members and kind of see things like that too. And if I do see it, then I try to address it. So I use direct communication, which is something that was also talked about in Andy's presentation. So for example, I'd be, hey, Sarah, this cave is a lot colder than the ones you're used to in Arizona. You might be getting a little hypothermic and maybe you should stop and put on an extra layer. Don't you agree? And if you kind of cue your ear to hear for that, don't you agree? And you've been trained like a little bit about that in direct communication, you're suddenly like, oh yeah, let's stop and let's take a little break here. Okay, so let's go on now to cave pre-planning. And this is what a lot of people think about when they think of rescue pre-plans. And they think about, well, what is it associated with the cave? And so we're going to dive into that a little bit more. So to get us started, where are some places in a cave that someone is most likely to get hurt? And I'd love for you to write an answer there in the chat. And they can just be kind of general places that could apply to various caves, or if you have something really specific that you could put that in. And Sarah, if you could read out a few answers when they start coming in of what places people think that are most likely to have injuries in a cave.
Sure. So we already have some coming in. One is mud-covered breakdown, exposure. So anywhere with some exposure, any free climbs or step overs, any high angle vertical sections, virgin breakdown, probably less stable than breakdown people have walked on before.
Excellent answers. Yeah, those are all good things. And there are things to consider too. Like this picture on the left is a pit with ladders that go up and down it. That's a horizontal cave. We don't rig it, but if somebody gets hurt, then we have to then rig it to do a litter to lower and then raise somebody up the other side. So we have to consider those things. And so when somebody might get hurt, how would you get them out? And how could you possibly rig the cave in advance so that you are ready for rescue? Some of the things to think about is rigging really high so that you could get a litter up higher and not have to deal with as much of an edge problem. So those are things that you can think about as you're just going in on a recreational trip, or if you're trying to plan for the cave. Okay, we're going to go to a more specific example now. This is a cave in the Western US, and this map's available online. It's got a couple entrances. And when you look at this cave map, you might see that there's multiple passages. It's a little bit mazy, but some of the passages are kind of parallel to each other. And you can see some big boulders on there. And there's some little tiny squeeze points here and there. What you might not realize, though, from this plan map is that it is a fairly vertical cave. And so when you get into that profile view, that it really helps. But when you download this map, you have to download 2 separate maps. And so not everyone might do that. And there actually has been a fatality in this cave from someone falling because they didn't realize that it was so vertical in sections. And so you really want to pay attention on what the maps. And so we mentioned earlier in cave search that having a good map is important, and that is also really important for doing pre-plans. You may want to put rescue caches in places in the cave in case somebody does get hurt, and the location for those would be often at obvious bottlenecks. So at the bottom of a drop or past a long crawlway, where it might be hard to get that gear there. And so if you already have it pre-stationed, that would make it easier. You can also look for some flat spaces because you might be hanging out there for a while and waiting for people to come. And if you can keep it away from that water, that is so important because you don't want all your gear to be wet or to be waiting in an area that you might have splashing water or running water, any kind of water. You don't want to be getting wetter and colder. And then there are various containers that you can use, and they can vary what's appropriate from cave to cave. What do you put in the rescue cache? So on the left is a photo of the truck that comes to a national seminar with thousands of feet of rope and over 8 furnos and lots of other gear. We don't want that much, obviously. But some of the things we might want to have in an in-cave rescue cache are, we think about the shelter or warmth because of hypothermia, and so some things to keep us warm. We need energy, so having some food there, and warm food can be a big morale booster. Having first aid, in addition to what we might be carrying in our packs, can be very helpful. And then some miscellaneous items that just you would normally take with you for quite a few different trips. Now, when we get to a specific cave pre-plan, I'm going to start with one for Lehman Caves, which is in Great Basin National Park where I work. And it's a show cave, not a particularly long one. We have a tour route that's about half-mile long, and it's a paved trail. But every couple of years, we have somebody who will have a stroke or a heart attack while they're on the tour, or they'll have a dizzy spell and then fall and hit their head. And we actually have a lot of people hitting their head in the low sections. We can find some blood and hair in sections of the cave, which is a little gross. Occasionally there's a knee that gives out. And so what we do is we have just a very simple 1 page of our emergency procedures that follows right along with what you do for a bigger cave rescue. It's just kind of a little more concise because we don't have to do quite as much as for a big cave rescue. And so we have to get a report of the incident and contact people so that we can get enough rescuers coming and fill that incident commander role. Make sure we are controlling our entrance so we don't have other people going in without being noted, and then have a search or initial response task force going depending on what the incident is. And then we want to probably send in some additional teams as more rescuers come and help out. Make sure we've got good communications, which is a challenge all the time. And then make sure everybody gets out of the cave, debrief. And then since we're a government agency, we have to really be careful of the documentation because there's going to be a big report afterwards. And we practice this very simple pre-plan every year. We do a scenario, and actually next Wednesday is when we're doing it, and we have park staff, and then we invite in other agency folks to come, and it's a really good refresher for the people who have done it multiple times, but we always have people who are doing it for the first time, and so it's just a nice, really quick overview of what's going on. We have 39 other caves in the park, and so we don't have a rescue pre-plan for each of those. Instead, what we have are some just very general standard operating procedures. And this is about 5 pages long of how to run the rescue. And so that's helpful. I always like to have things written down so that people who haven't necessarily had quite as much cave rescue training might still be able to do some kind of decent job of getting it started while other folks are arriving who have more cave rescue experience. Now some of the things that we might want to have for a cave-specific pre-plan include the cave name or names. Sometimes there's more than one name, and that would be good to know. And then the location's really important. The county, the state, the nearest town, the GPS location. And the reason part of this is important is to find it, but also to know who is the agency that has the jurisdiction, who's responsible for that. So in many cases, it's the county sheriff, but it can also be the fire department. It might be the land agency like the National Park Service. It could be the Department of Natural Resources. So it's good to know who has that agency having jurisdiction, and then what other agencies might be involved, like the Forest Service or the Bureau of Land Management, and landowners too. So those are important things to know. Having a brief description of the cave is really great so that you can just give a quick snapshot to understand of how long this rescue could potentially take. So knowing the length and depth of the cave and what kind of obstacles there are there, and if there's any other hazards. We have several caves that are rattlesnake dens, and so that would be really good to know before you go there. And if they have bad air, if the water levels change, if there's falling rocks in certain areas. And then again, to have that good map of the cave. And then how do you get to the cave? Where do you park? And how do you hike there? Are there cliffs? We have some that you have to go down cliffs to get to them, that you might have to go through really thick brush, poison ivy, or in Puerto Rico, I remember having it pointed out, trees, they're like, don't touch those trees because you will get a rash worse than poison ivy. And I get poison ivy plenty bad. So I was like, okay, I will remember that tree and stay far away. All right, then if we have a staging area, parking ends up being really important here because you got to fit everybody in. And so you also need to know is what kind of vehicle can get there. Do you need four-wheel drive or an ATV or a shuttle? Some of the things you might have to consider right away is how are you going to communicate on the surface and in the cave? Do you need to flag the way to the entrance or have a chainsaw crew go in and cut away a path? Do you need law enforcement security at a road gate? And then the GPS locations also of that staging area. And consider cell phone coverage because it may work great for you, but maybe not for other people if they have a different carrier. And then also thinking in your pre-plan that it's really a good idea to figure out, okay, how can an ambulance get here? What about a helicopter landing zone? If there are locked gates, either to the cave or to roads, where can you get the keys? And then approximate times can be helpful to get from the staging area and then to the cave entrance, and then from the cave entrance to likely areas where the patient might be. Is there any special personal gear that's needed? And if you haven't already put down who the landowner is, that would be good to put in there. And then the nearest medical facility or trauma center if it's a major accident. Okay, so those are some of the bigger picture things that you want to have in a cave specific pre-plan. Now let's go inside the cave. And when we think of this part of the rescue plan, we're thinking of how to get a person out from point A or B or C. And actually we might have to go, how do we get the person from point A to point B and then point B to point C? And it might be a whole bunch of little segments that are needed. And you need to know for each segment the number of people needed, and if any specialists might have to be called in. For example, maybe you need to do some microblasting and there's only a few people who could do that. The time needed. So when I worked at Jewel Cave and I went out through the Miseries, which is a very long crawlway, followed by the Mini Miseries, which is another long crawlway, but even smaller. The old rescue plan was if you get hurt past that part, you're just going to have a doctor come in and you're just going to have to wait and heal out there. Now Jewel Cave has this really nice cave rescue pre-plan, and they have some things that they have put in there to get somebody out. And one of the things they have there is the travel time. And what I love about their plan is they have the travel time for Jewel Cave cavers who can move nimbly through all these tight constrictions and crawly things. And there's not very much rigged in Jewel Cave, you just scramble it. And then, so for example, it might take 45 minutes for a Jewel Cave caver to get through this passage. And then they have the time for a normal caver, possibly carrying some gear. And that often, well, a Jewel Cave caver can do it in 45 minutes. A normal caver, it's an hour to an hour and a half. And then an estimated evac time might be 3 hours or more. So it's not really nice to have those different time estimates in that cave rescue pre-plan. along with any gear needed and any other special considerations. And you might want to think about how you're going to wrap up your patient and patient packaging. And that was an excellent presentation by Carrie Bull. Okay, so let's go into a little bit more on the cave-specific pre-planned contents for a vertical obstacle. And if you're having trouble seeing this, if you go up into the upper right hand of your screen, you can click on standard, and that makes the PowerPoint slide look a little bit bigger. So the vertical obstacle, this plan is great because there are photos going into it and out of it. And so you can see the route of the litter going in with the yellow, and then it's going to come out of this hole down the black line. Whereas the caver route is following the red arrows. And so that's really good to know that the litter is not going to follow the same path that the caver would. This also mentions the technique, which is to rig a munter lower, use a basket rig anchor as shown, and then lower straight down the pitch, avoiding the spiral of the regular caver route. There's also on another page the time to complete the task. With the rigging time, I think for this is about 2 minutes, and operation time like 3 minutes. So they expect it to be pretty quick. You're just going to move right through. And then the gear list. What length of rope do you need? What length of webbing to do that basket anchor? How many carabiners? And then any other things you might need. For cave modification, so if you have some really tight spots, this is another way that you can document that well by having photos looking in both directions, and then having overprinted what exactly would need to be taken out in order to get that litter through. This also has working area from both sides, so that's good to know that you can have 2 people working on it at the same time. The estimated time to complete is about 30 minutes to remove this, and the gear list of what you would need, the hammers and chisels and the wonder bars. Thanks to Ellen Paget, here's a more complicated diagram of what you would need to do for pre-plan for the warm-up pit at Ellison's Cave, the 125-foot drop. And I really like this because it has the different colors, so you can easily see the different ropes there. And the things are just labeled really well, like bad bolt. Okay, yeah, you know that's there, and so you're not tempted to rig off of that. And it has the pads in different places, and so that's just, it's really nicely done here. All the equipment needs are spelled out, including you have the radios in Ziploc baggies, and that's good to know because here you've got the waterfall and you don't want them to get wet. And then the lengths of the rope are great. So having this already thought out in advance can really make the rescue go a lot faster. While I was looking for some pictures, thinking about cave pre-plans, I came across a photo of this high line. This is what some call the infamous high line in Pettyjohns. This was during a mock rescue. I was there as an instructor, as an angel. And one of the things to keep in mind is that when we're coming up with scenarios and things in a cave pre-plan, a rescue pre-plan, we need to be asking some of the same questions that we ask during rigging. Will it work? And in this case, yes, a high line will work. In fact, it is in the rescue pre-plan for Pettyjohns Cave. Is it safe? Yes, it was rigged very safely. But is it efficient? In this case, this high line took hours to operate. And there were a whole bunch of level 1 students nearby, and they had been practicing moving a litter in this passage multiple times during the week. And so they just were like, we can get him out in 20 minutes. But it was never allowed to happen because the people who were in charge were like, no, we're going to do this high line. And so it took hours. So it's something to think about if you're putting together a rescue pre-plan. Those 3 questions are really important, and be looking for the simplest method often is the best way. So let's go on to some of the regional pre-planning. And this is where we get into Ellen Paget's presentation, Cave Rescue Management when they get big, because you're going to need to have a lot of people. So do you know who the agency having jurisdiction is? Who's coming if you call 911? And do they have cave rescue experience? Do you know who your regional coordinator is? It's very easy to find. You just go to ncrc.info, and there's a staff tab up on the top, and click on that, and you'll see all the regional coordinators on the left-hand side. And that person is good to know because they also know what training is going on. And so if you don't know your regional coordinator, I encourage you to reach out and let them know that you're interested in cave rescue. You can find out what training is coming up. And having this regional approach is really good because the training can really integrate both agency and cavers. And I'm both. I work for federal government. I'm also do EMS and fire, but I'm also a caver. And there's different mindsets, and I can even like compartmentalize and be in one mindset or the other. And it's really good to have people from both sides come to these classes and these trainings, because you can find out the strengths of everybody and really help to develop those things and help to improve where they might be a little bit weaker. Plus, it's just a lot of fun to meet more people. So I highly encourage doing some training in your region. Now, what if, we'll go back to that what if question I had at the beginning. What if something does go wrong? And you're trying to figure out, okay, we did all this pre-planning. We still have these problems. What do we do now? First off, stay calm. As calm as you can in the face of an emergency. And that's something you can practice. Evaluate the situation and figure out, is this something that you can deal with your group, or do you need to call out and get extra help? And to find out a little bit more about when you need to call out versus when you can just do it, you're on your own. Check out Tom Evans's presentation, The Small Party Assisted Rescues versus Call Out Rescues. Then you establish a clear chain of command, especially if you're caving with people you don't know particularly well. That is important. And work as a team as much as possible and stay positive. In the American Caving Accidents Report 2017, which if you haven't read this is fantastic because it's a huge edition and it has a lot of great information on it in it. And I believe it's available from the NSS bookstore for a very reasonable price. But there's an article by John Punches and Bonnie Armstrong. And my favorite part of that article, and the article is all about rescue pre-planning. A calm, reassuring, positive voice is the single best rescue tool, and it can resolve most incidents without the need for escalation. So just remember to be calm, reassuring, and positive. If you'd like to get a little deeper into it, then I highly recommend going into a little bit of the psychological first aid. Rebecca Lansegrist has this in her presentation, How to Handle It, Caring for You and Your Patient. She doesn't cover this particular acronym, but it's one that Knowles does, and I really like it, called SCATCH. So if you are responding, you want to make sure that the patient is feeling safe, give them a sense of safety by moving them to a spot if you need to that is a little bit farther away from the accident. And then be very calm. You want to make sure that, encourage them to take some deep breaths and calm down a little bit. A couple weeks ago, I was at an ATV accident and the young man was just really frightened, and we were trying to calm him down. And as he calmed down and his blood pressure went down and his breathing got better, he realized he wasn't really hurt that bad. It was just some minor things, and so that was really good. So being calm can really let you see what the injuries truly are. Efficacy, trying to be as efficient as you can, as making it work well, and having a good connection with your patient. It might be a long way out, and so learning to find a way to have a good connection. You might ask them about previous cave trips, or about their pets, or about where they want to go on vacation. It's something to try to figure out how to have a nice long conversation where you can really connect. And then giving them a sense of hope. You can say, hey, our group here is well rested and strong and we're going to get you out well. Or, hey, we've got this super good rescue team coming in and they're going to be helping us out. And so you'll be out, and before you know it, there are different ways that you can give hope. I encourage you to prepare yourself through training. NCRC training is great, and the website has some of the upcoming training coming. And I'm happy to say, like every week or two, I'm hearing about another training that is being planned, and so there's going to be a lot more coming down the pipeline. Of course, the virtual topics in cave rescue is out there, so you can have a nice library of videos to watch. I highly encourage you to take some medical training. You can take a wilderness first aid class in just a weekend, and that'll give you a lot of good pointers for if you get hurt in the backcountry or deep in a cave. The psychological first aid class is free on the Mountain Rescue Association website. Learning about that incident command system can really help you get through a rescue smoother. And there's a link to that FEMA training on the ncrc.info site. Yeah, and you think through scenarios, read the American Caving Accidents. The June issue of the NSS News is going to be American Caving Accidents for the past 2 years. And I've had a preview of the issue. It's great. So that will be out really soon. And yeah, have fun going through it and thinking about what you would do in some of those situations. There's some podcasts I really like listening to also because they give me the what ifs, and I just like thinking about those. The Caving Podcast by Matt Pelsor has, he interviews a different caver every month, and some of them mention some cave rescues, and they're fascinating stories. The Fine Line is a podcast done by Teton County Search and Rescue up in Wyoming. I think it's episode 22. They talk about going into a cave, and it's a couple climbers who go on a through trip through an alpine cave. It's a pull down. You got to pull your ropes. They have no map of the cave, and they actually are start negotiating it by trying to feel the air currents. The rescuers eventually found them partly by smell, so that cave search by smell really comes in part there, and it's just quite a story to listen to. Portland Mountain Rescue also has a podcast, and they have got some stories about falling into glacier and funeral caves, which are kind of scary because the air is so bad in those. They have to be super careful. And then The Sharp End is by the American Alpine Club, and it has a lot of rope type rescues in it. So thanks for listening. I've had fun sharing a few things about planning so you can minimize that pain and hopefully go and have a great cave trip. We'll open it up for questions in just a moment, but if you think of them later, feel free to email me later at gretchenbaker@caves.org.
Awesome. Thank you, Gretchen. That was a wonderful talk, and it gave us all a lot to think about for our own individual trips, as well as what we can do on kind of a bigger scale. We are totally open for questions. If you want to unmute, you're welcome to do so and ask your question, or you can type it in the chat and I'm happy to read it, or Gretchen can read it. But yeah, I guess one of the questions I have is, have you ever been on a cave trip where you realized that something happened and you did implement something that you had previously planned, like either an official pre-plan at your workplace or on a personal trip where you're like, hey, I thought about this crisis and now I'm solving it?
Yes. So for example, in Lehman Caves, we have we can put a litter on a wheel through a lot of the cave, but we have one section that gets too narrow, and we know exactly where we have to lift it up and pass it over a area. And so that's one we try to practice every year. And so it's really cool where we're like, oh, and I hear somebody else say, hey, this is the part where we have to do it. And so I really like it when somebody else is chiming in and they remember, like, oh yeah. And so it's really great to train on those pre-plans. And I think when I think enough in what if scenarios, like I'm always thinking, like when I go in the caves, like, oh, if somebody got hurt here, what would we do? And so I find that sometimes I plan mock rescues around those things because that's a great way to actually test it out and see if that plan would work or not. And sometimes it works great, and sometimes there are modifications to make it go a little more smoothly.
Very cool. Thank you. Anybody else have any other questions for Gretchen? I'll just check the chat real quick too. All right, well, I guess we can resolve the formal part of the Q&A, and we're welcome to now just open it to general discussion, anything all y'all want to talk about. Thanks again to Gretchen and to Casey, both of our speakers tonight. So many thanks for these very thoughtful talks, and 2 weeks from now, we will be having 2 more talks, one on bad air in caves and one on stress management for rescuers. But yeah, thank you both to our speakers tonight and for everyone who joined us this evening.